40 minutes. Your footwear's fine, but just watch as we move into the tunnels. We will be going on cobbles as you are now, we'll be going on metal steps, we'll be on wood, we'll be on the sandstone bedrock. So as you change step, just make sure you've got a firm footing, but that's fine. Your helmet is not that we expect anything to fall on your head, but there are points at which we can get very close to the arch, and if you hit your head without the helmet, they're hard, they're solid, and you might find. The tunnels are pretty dry at the moment, so you shouldn't get too many drips, but don't worry, it's just natural as the water flows through. If you've got a camera, please feel free to take photographs, we have no objection to that. And mobile phones may not work here, but they will work in the tunnels, so, okay? We're going to start the actual tour once we get inside. So as soon as we go through the doors, we're literally going to go down some steps. Just take your time, and we'll start the actual tour by the map. And then we'll go. Okay, if you'd like to follow me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now go on. We'll get to the end of the day, thank you. Thank you.
Keep a fair hold as you come down. At the bottom step, just slightly higher. So
see you later.
Are you local? Oh, right. So you thought you'd come and see what's in your neighbourhood? Yeah. Are you local originally?
I'm not, you are.
Yeah, I'm from.
And you're from?
Kent, originally.
Oh, that you can't help.
I've been here 20 years, you can tell.
Oh, that's okay. You're an adopted scout, so that's all right. All right. I call this one of the wonders of Liverpool, and you understand why I call it that at the end of the tour. And it's a bit like a big jigsaw puzzle, but we haven't got the leg of the picture, so we don't really know how many pieces are in this jigsaw, and certainly we don't know what the real picture is. And if you've ever done a jigsaw like that, you'll know that you put pieces in, you can get along quite well, then you get stuck and you struggle, and then unfortunately you find the pieces you put in are actually in the wrong place. And over the last few years, that's a bit where we are now, struggling to put pieces in, and we have found some of the pieces actually were in the wrong place. And the first of those is the fact that I tell you that Williamson was born in 1769. But up until sort of a couple of years ago, we used to tell you he was born in Warrington, which is about 15 miles that way, when in fact he was born in Yorkshire, which is about 100 miles over there. He came to Liverpool in 1780, and he started work and lived with a firm called Tate's in Wolstenholme Square in Liverpool. And they were tobacco and sort of stuff manufacturers. And he worked for them in what capacity we do not know, but by 1802 he was a businessman in his own right. He was in partner with another chap. He married the boss's daughter, Elizabeth Tate, the same year. So by 1803 he was an extremely rich man when he took over the Tate business.
Is it the same Tate?
No.
So this is
No,
not
no,
well, let's put it this way, there is no research, all the research has been done at the moment, because we do have people who do the genealogy and the like. That's how they discovered that in fact Williamson was born up in Yorkshire, that's Warrington. There's no evidence that links these Tates with the Tate family, albeit the name seems, to me. So whether there's any sort of very wide link, we don't know. But at the moment there's no evidence to suggest that. So by 1806 he was an extremely rich man. In those days, a man of substance. He retired in 1818, his wife died in 1820, there were no children. He died in 1840. So at 71, a pretty good age for that period of time. Are you Doctor Who followers by any chance?
a bit, yeah.
Right. Well, I want us to get into his time machine actually and go back in time. And I want us to set the date to 1806. And when we land in 1806, it's important that you try to visualise the picture I'm going to describe to you, because it's only that way that you can actually work out what this may be about. Because if you look at it and what you see now, it doesn't work. So we'd have landed here in 1806, we'd have actually landed in the countryside basically, because around us is country. We'd have landed in a quarry, obviously being Merseyside, Liverpool, Greater Merseyside, it's a sandstone quarry. We would have not been in Liverpool. Liverpool hadn't quite come up this far then, but we would have been in the little village, township, whatever you want to call it, of Edge Hill. And as the name suggests, of course, it's the edge of the hill, because as you know, it's uphill this way to the top. I say around here there's one or two properties, but basically countryside. But the main thing is we're in a sandstone quarry. Now there's two things that are very significant and obvious about quarries, but are important to this story. One is quarries are open to the sky, so we'd have been looking at the sky. The second is that quarries normally are irregular in shape, depending how they've extracted the stone in accord with the type of stone they've extracted. So that's where we are in 1806. And it's at that time that Williamson started to acquire land around the quarry for the purposes of building houses for the gentry on the top of the quarry. I lived there. He did build houses on the top of the quarry, significant properties and in quite numbers on or near to the top of the quarry. So the important thing is we've established a purpose. Okay? So we'll come back to that later. But one of the problems we've got about Joseph, if you visit the National Trust place, for instance, you'll find that you've got all the information, haven't you, when it was built, who built it, how much money this cost, how much, all the other things. We don't have the luxury of anything like that. Right? It's a mystery. Whether there were documents, which we'd expect there would have been, they're still lying in somebody's attic or somewhere, who knows. But we have no evidence of them. They could be destroyed, and we'll never know. So we don't even have a map really to give us any clue. So in 1995, so this is almost 20 years old now, this microgravity survey of the area was done, which basically the experts would say that those areas that are identified in red on the map are, or could be, are readings that suggest there may be tunnels. Not that there are, but they are, they are conducive to tunnels. Now, if you're looking at this map, just to put you where you are there at the moment, and we're going to go around there. That area is over there towards Paddington. That area is over there to the school, Archbishop now, which we'll know, and of course this corner is over in this direction here. Yeah. Now, we know some of them are tunnels because they say you're here, so they're tunnels. Yeah. We know they're tunnels because they're only open on special occasions. They're up in Paddington. If you went down them, you'd discover that they are more like cellars. They're not as big as this, right? Ornate brickwork, and again, they are full of rubbish. So there's a lot of excavation of rubbish. Because one of the things about tunnels after Williamson's death is they became full of rubbish. If you'd have visited the tunnels when they first opened, we were actually walking on your head. You look behind me with my torches, that is the level at which we were walking. In other words, in line with that. So all the way along there, right way round, this was full of rubbish. Most of this stuff was soil type stuff, any broken crockery and the like was saved. You'll see the outcome of that later. The rest of it was recycled by Liverpool University Gardens Department, free of charge, gratefully accepted. This end, as you'll see, is very much more stone orientated, and I'll explain why in a minute. So this would be more difficult to excavate. If we come down from the Paddington side, incidentally, you've probably read the story, have you, that all this was done so Williamson and his wife could get to the church and to the pub without getting wet. Yeah? Could be interesting, because there's the church, St Mary's Church, on the top of the hill up there, yeah? And there's the Burstport Public House, which is still there. There appears to be a tunnel going to the Burstport Public House, and there appears to be a tunnel going to St Mary's Church. Did he do all this to get to the church and pub?
Oh no, so where does he live?
Well, sometime he lived here, in these.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's no evidence that these tunnels were linked, for starters. He was a churchgoer, he was a Christian, so he could have gone to church there. That wasn't actually his main church. And also, whether he went to the pub or not, of course, that's up to debate. And bear in mind, he's an extremely rich man, so he may have had other places where he would go.
What was his main church then? What was his main church?
His main church was actually further down in, what's the name of his name?
St Anne's.
St Thomas's.
St Thomas's, which is no longer.
What's that?
He donated the sandstone to St Thomas's years ago.
Further towards Liverpool One, isn't it?
Yeah, which was under the Royal Liverpool Hospital.
Right.
It was demolished to build the hospital, albeit it was derelict at that
Right.
So that was the English church, and there's no evidence that these tunnels were actually linked, right? Now, if we come down here in Mason Street, and if you see in Mason Street, there's just the remains of one of these old houses, just the frontage, and at the back of it a concrete road. If you go down a particular way, you can get in, again only open on special occasions, and you would end up in something very similar to this called the Banquet Hall. It's a modern name for one of the stories of Williamson. We invited all his friends one night for a meal. They were rich people, they expected a bit of a good feed. He gave them, sit them down at quite wooden tables and really gave them bacon and beans, if you like. And some of them were too happy and left, and others stayed. That's something similar to that is described as happening. Not quite as I've described it, that's the romanticism of it, but it's of that nature. But it did actually take above ground, and it would fit in with Williamson's character. Now, if we actually come back down to here, we're going to walk around here and back to here. Now, when you were getting your helmets on, you were literally standing there, which is underneath there. So if you just come to the edge here, you'll see this is just support that's been put in by the volunteers. But can you see there the end of an arch? Which is actually at the tunnel that went along here to the end, which we'll see in a minute. This has collapsed, right? Except that is where it starts to become intact. Now that actually joins another tunnel here, which goes out to where you came in through the gate, to basically the roadway. And then off that is this rather large object, going in that direction, intersected by this, which being local you'll realise is the railway into Liverpool Lime Street, built around 1830 by Stevenson as a single tunnel, became a double tunnel through the sandstone, and then later in life became the cutting that we know now. This is called the triple tunnel. And as the name suggests, it's triple, three. But it's not the three of us standing alongside of each other, it's the three of us on top of each other. Now again, the piece of jigsaw that may be different is, we know there's two tunnels under there, that's fact. They're full of rubbish, but there's two. Whether they're 1 and 2 and 3 is underneath, or whether they're 2 and 3 and 1 is gone, we can't say with absolute certainty. But the evidence would suggest the latter, that 1 has gone and there's 2. But until they dig through the rubbish, if they hit brick, there's another tunnel. If they hit bedrock, there isn't. Time will tell. Okay, so what we're going to do now is to start to walk round through the tunnels and try to piece together what this may have had. Now above your head you're looking at a brick arch. Incidentally, they're all handmade bricks as well. You'll see at the end of the tour, I'll show you a photograph of the painting of the period, which you will see the houses and the fact that there were gardens. The gardens were over at this at one point in time, so this garden supported gardens. Okay? As indeed the arch where we go out of. So we'll just move down and look here. You'll see this substantial sandstone arch. You will have a look in a minute what that's about. And then you'll notice a gap between the sandstone and the brick, which actually was bricked up originally, but it had been opened up so you can see inside, and you should now clearly see a brick arch. Big hole, can you see a big hole? That's one of the many holes that were put in things in later life to get the rubbish through. So what you're looking into there is actually the cellar of one of the old houses. And at the back of there, which obviously is not visible from the angle that we're at, there are a couple of steps still remaining. So this arch here is supporting the cellar floor basically, and that arch would have been supporting the house or houses above. Okay? So we just go down here, watch the step as we get to the end, and we just step up. Look back, you can clearly see the arch, and that would have come all the way along here at the correct level and would not have looked like it does here. A bit sick, because this is the collapsed arch, Until recently, we thought it was the only example of what's called a composite, because it's made of brick, sandstone, brick. But last year, when they were building the student accommodation, which was on your left as you came through the gate,
Yeah.
when they were building the foundations, that had to be supervised by an archaeologist as part of the planning permission, and they did find some smaller tunnels, one of which was actually made similar to this. I'll show you some photographs at the end. One day, the volunteers will dig this rubbish out. Can you see what I mean by full of rubbish? Are you all right with feet in inches, or do you want metres?
Whatever you like.
Whenever you like.
Okay,
It's fine.
well, I'm of an era of, yeah, I can understand myself when I talk about feet in inches. That's about, say, 9 feet, 6, 8, something like 6, 9 feet down there. Probably they'd have to dig the same distance before they actually reach the bedrock.
Right.
And if you look on this side, you'll see what I mean by bedrock. And you're very fortunate today, because we just reintroduced our ducks to the temporary house.
You set them free. don't
We
you?
found these ducks, they have nothing to do with Joseph Williamson in any shape or form. They were put in there by somebody when the centre opened almost 12 years ago, and they've been missing for a few weeks. They were in the way. We've just refloated them. And at times they do look quite real. But this character does have a significance. There's dotted around for the youngsters so that they can try and pick them up. Obviously a mole, and the reason for a mole is his nickname was the Mole of Edge Hill, because his men popped up here, there and everywhere. And you'll also be pleased to know that this arch above our head has 41 rows of sandstone. They're laughing because we've just been counting, right?
Just for us.
Well, no, it's only because you get to a point where your eyes go funny and you miss a few. But there are 41 full rows which have about 9 blocks of sandstone on average across the lot. Right? You see, we're bang on the mark. The point of that is this is a substantial structure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah? And you can imagine the work, and it would be very much, you know, manual work that's gone into not only preparing each of these blocks, hammer and chisel, but also preparing this arch. And it's supposed to cellar floor. They reckon Williamson spent perhaps about £75,000 or so on doing this. Modern language, depending which quote you use, you're probably talking, say, 8, 10, 12 million pounds, something in that order.
Just this.
To do his project, if you like.
Oh,
The whole thing.
In modern language, if you like, a housing estate, because he did in a way build a luxury housing estate.
Yes.
Now you might say, well, why build a luxury housing estate here? Well, you wouldn't perhaps today.
Yeah, it was then.
But think where luxury housing estates are built today. They're built in nice areas, say scenic views, and they're built where you can get to work. The only difference between then and now is that getting to work in those days would have been just popping down the hill on a horse or walking. Right? Lovely view from the top of here, really mind, there's nothing in your way. But of course today, it's really, I'm near a railway station, aren't I, so I can get to there because distances are. You'll see there's like this chute that goes up, and if you look carefully with my torches now, you'll see it actually goes to the right. There is an arch actually at the top of there, which you can only see from the bottom, and that actually does go to the cellar. What that was put in for, if it was put in, or whether it was already there or not, we can't say. What we can say, it was certainly used as a rubbish chute later on in life. One day we hope to be able to take people down here and into the triple, even if it's only to look. But obviously you have to satisfy a lot of issues before we do that. Why do we actually start to move up here? If you go over to the right, just take your time, and then you'll avoid banging your head on the actual arch itself. And again, there's no mistaking this is sandstone. You can rub your hands across it and then just do that in your hand. You can quite clearly feel the sandstone. They would possibly be the way that it's been broken away from the actual other sandstone. You will see some distinct chisel marks later, but they could have been as well, bits of it. It's very difficult to see in this because of the thing there. But if you look above you here, you think it's not too big. But imagine if you were standing down there without all this scaffolding. This is actually quite a big chamber. That is actually bridged to support that. I'd like to come up here to what we call the pyramid. And you can see again like a little chute here that led up to the cellars of another. You can see the rear of the cellar from now that we were looking at from the other end, and obviously another one of our moles. You are actually now standing on the property. So like you would have been in his day, you're underneath the houses, we're now under student accommodation. Right? Now, if you imagine back in 1806, if we were standing here, we'd be standing slightly deeper and we'd be looking at the sky, because basically this would be open. And we built houses over the top. How would you build a house over what is basically a small
That's what I was
canyon?
thinking about.
Eh?
That's what I was wondering about.
No. Well, he did, because he simply put an arch across the top. Yeah. He arched it. Now, if we take the buildings where he built, imagine we're standing on the top of the quarry, so you two are the actual houses. Where I'm standing is the gardens, but we're not very big gardens. In those days, they wanted long gardens. The only problem is we've got to drop all the way down there into the quarry. So to achieve the long gardens, i.e. the first tunnel and the tunnel we're going to go out under, we need to look at this principle. Is he took, oops, we're not flying, right? Get it back on. He took the two sides of the sandstone, he bridged it with an arch, and he filled in above. You think of what old quarries are used for today, one of the uses is landfill. Imagine filling in a quarry back in 1806. Think of the canals, think of the railways, how did they get across things like valleys? They couldn't fill them in, so they put a pile of arches, joined them together, put them on stilts, and you get your aqueducts and your viaducts. Go back, way back in time, certainly to the Romans, if not beyond. What do you see in many Roman antiquities? Evidence of arches and the like. Because the arch was the building principle. So Williamson using arches was not unique per se. What he perhaps used it for. Now you will have heard the stories that Williamson did all this for no other reason other, in other words, he tunnelled into the hillside for no reason other than to keep the poor soldiers, sailors, Napoleonic wars, give them money. In other words, he was just a philanthropist. I've already told you he had a purpose, that's fact. These houses stood for well over 100 years. There was abundance along here, albeit in different guises. The other thing is, of course, Williamson did not tunnel. Think of what we've been describing. He didn't tunnel this.
He's been closing it in.
The only evidence, if you like, of a true tunnel is this little bit here. The evidence, would quarry people do that? The answer would probably be no. But why would quarry people quarry through?
Right.
So the question that leaves us then, he didn't tunnel, he created tunnels, right? By bridging over the top with all types of different size arches, and you'll see a few here in a minute. He did have a purpose, so was he a philanthropist? In other words, or was he just an out-and-out businessman making more money? And so we'll come back to that in a minute. You look up here, you can see an arch. Ignore the concrete, that's modern, but you see an arch supporting what would have been part of the buildings above. This arch here, which might suggest that that was left open for some reason, we don't know. But you talked about chisel marks. Well, if you just look at this wall here, you can see chisel marks going to the left and to the right.
Yes.
Yeah? Now, would quarry people chisel? They'd chisel when the stone was taken out and was being prepared. So the evidence would suggest that that's been Williamson's people, perhaps trimming this to give it the symmetrical shape to create this tunnel, which would have gone underneath there. Can you just see between the two green things, black? That's rubbish.
Right.
This tunnel carried on through there, under Mason Street, which is just above my torch beam, to somewhere the other side, wherever. And this is the original brick. This is called the Kebab Tunnel, named by the diggers who dug it out. It's full with rubbish, and named after these two objects, which look like kebabs. These actually have no significance to Joseph because they date from the year 2000, and they are called pile foundations. You know, when they pile from the top, drill the hole, put in the metal rods, fill it with concrete, but this should have been in something solid. It wasn't solid here because it was just loose rubbish.
Right, okay.
There's plenty of them, they're not going to fall down. Just watch the steps as you come up here. We do have a lot of people, organisations, and incidentally, if you do belong to any organisations that are looking for places to visit, particularly during the winter, you can arrange evening tours for groups. And you'll be taken round in the evening. It does have a different feel in the night, even though it looks exactly the same. There's no extra lights or anything like that. But we do also have a lot of schools come and deal with matters under the national curriculum. And one of the things I like to show the children is this. Because until the light was introduced, and we have the water, we have the creation of life. And in about 3 or 4 places, you can actually see where this has been created purely because we're in here. Temperature of the tunnel is pretty stable. If it's hot outside, it tends to be nice and cool in here, and vice versa. And basically, you don't see much in the active life. That's why we keep a total food ban in here. Outside would have been a different situation because they were old stables. Nothing to do with Williamson, built in around 1865 to house the horses to pull the rubbish carts of Liverpool. And did so, although the stables over the years became smaller, some collapsed, some were demolished. But by 1990 the whole thing had fallen into, until it was resurrected as the Heritage Centre back in opened in 2002. If you'd like to just come up here, I'll show you how we built the tunnel. How we built the tunnel, I should say. One of you stand on these steps and face me, and one of you here, or 2 of you together, matters not, as long as you can see here. The principles I describe are pretty much the same principles today. What you've got here is this shape, it's called the springing point. You can really see the chisel mark going one way. Yeah. So what would have happened is the masons and the like would have chipped this out all the way, both sides, to wherever this went to. The only difference is, depending on what they were building, the size, this would be bigger and different shape, but the principle's the same, because if you put bricks there, any weight, they collapse. Put bricks there, the weight of the arch dissipates. So then the carpenters would have put wooden centering arch across, and in those days it would have been probably proper wood, as distinct from the options available today. And then when that's all ready, brickies or masons do the work on the top. When it's all set, dry, take away the wood and A-press the arch. So the principles are basically the same, it's only the materials that are different and the way that they do it. For instance, the tunnel that's standing in here, which is going to take us from here to the next tunnel, was built purely to get us from A to B. So it was a transportation tunnel, as distinct from these weren't. And it was a JCB digger from the top, dug a trench, shut it up the side, concrete, shut at the top, concrete. Probably very little in the way of manpower, or personnel power, and then we would have had this tunnel. Very unromantic, but a lot quicker. Now let's just deal with Williamson the man as an employer and see whether we have any philanthropy in him. He was apparently a good employer, and you've got to be thinking, although we have no records, that perhaps 200 or 300 people must have worked here. You would think there had to be a lot of people to do this type of project. He apparently was a good employer in the sense that if anybody got injured, he tried to find them another sort of job in the company, if you like. It was thirsty work. The water was putrid, or even though they weren't tunnelling, it was still thirsty. So he laid on beer and ale so they could sort of have a drink for being thirsty. I think the words health and safety perhaps did not have the same meaning in those days as they may have today. But one thing he insisted upon, if I'm paying you for to work, then you are going to work. And if I've nothing for you to do, right, you two, get over there and dig a hole. Well, we've dug that hole, we'll go and fill it in again. And there are many stories like that from this era where the workers did things that had no apparent purpose. And you know historical stories start off small, don't they? And they tend to come together like a funnel into one big story about all this was for no purpose. Is that where the link has come from? that in fact some of it had no purpose, but certainly the whole thing did. Yeah, there was a purpose for it. He was a churchgoer, as I said, but one thing he would never do is give any money to the poor in the church box, saying, I have my own way of dealing with this problem, which would suggest that he knew exactly what he was doing, and perhaps in modern language, if it's still called job creation, but certainly that type of thing. Who knows? You have to make your own judgment on that. About 20 steps up to the top, you'll be on sandstone bedrock when we reach the top, and I will overtake you when we get to the top. You are actually under somebody's gardens now, student garden, so I would imagine the Chelsea flower show style. And I think it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, this was Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. But like all centres, one of the problems we have here in Liverpool is that we are a pay place. There's such a lot of free stuff in Liverpool because we have to do, because we're all volunteers with the exception of one person. So we do have to obviously do it. So like all attractions, you have to try and put on those extra things to bring in. And this place at Christmas, it's like one big grotto. You're walking on the bedrock. Many people think that being a guide here and listening to the stories that this was all done so you could get to the pub and to the church, because this is all you need. That I spend my day like this. Like most perceptions in life, they never match the reality, as you're going to see as we enter the double tunnel. We have 6 steps here to go down. That sounds like Joseph, or in modern parlance, David, the centre manager moving away. And as you enter now, you enter the double tunnel. I'll deal with this lot in a second. In other words, the rubbish. But just look at the double tunnel, first of all. First of all, the size. Yeah. Bear in mind handmade bricks. Going above your head. Ahead of you, you look just through that black sort of top, you can see wood. But that's the end of where the tunnel ceased. And it's called the double because you've got the big one, and then you've got this smaller one ahead of you. Can you just see the arch there? And we'll have a look at that closer in a minute. Well, below that is the entertainment area, and you've got the floor of the entertainment area. Well, actually, underneath there is another drop. Right. And there was a third arch, which sort of peaked about the floor level. Right. So at that point, originally, that was a triple tunnel. Why this one, and the one that's not there any longer, was built, we don't know. But we'll revisit that in a minute. What you have here now, there's really 2 histories of the Williamson tunnels in my book. One is when Williamson was the man alive there, and after his death. Where after his death, it started to become a rubbish tip. This is a small sample, a very small sample. It's quite interesting for the youngsters because one of the obvious questions, what is missing from there that you would find in today's rubbish tips? And it's plastic. The only bit of plastic is this, right? But we have things like
oyster shells.
Yeah, literally hundreds and hundreds of oyster shells were found. Because in those days, of course, oysters were a poor man's dish. Go down to the River Mersey, get yourself a bucket full of oysters. So that did not have anything to do with wealth, per se. And whether so many were found because they were what people had eaten in the houses, or whether there's, apparently in those days also they used crushed oyster shells for building, you know, like a grit we'd call it today. So whether that was the case or not. Obviously, bottles across the eras. You've got the round bottom bottle, you know, which we couldn't stand up deliberately, so the cork was always wet. You've got the cod bottle developed by a fellow called Harry Cod back in 1745, the one with the ollie, the marble in, kept it fresh. And you've heard the expression, a load of cod's a wallop? That came from that bottle because one of the products they used to put in it was called wallop, which is a pretty awful drink apparently. Hence the expression, a load of cod's wallop. They would have probably been ink bottles. You see all the tops of them on top, right? You might find this interesting, I do. See these, like, I suppose in modern terms, they could be ladies like
drinking boxes,
makeup or things like that. And of course, when you buy these things, you open them up, it's all jar, isn't it? Only a little concave where you put the paste, and they're the same, so it's no different. And then you've got these, literally hundreds and hundreds of these jars. The significant thing about these jars is that they're actually, many of them are not broken. And the clue to that is on the bottom. Because on the bottom of many of these, or most of these jars, are the words Hartley of Aintree, Liverpool. Long Lane Aintree, the whole Hartley's jam factory.
Yeah.
Basically, they're the old jam jar, which historically we didn't break. You just threw in the bin in those days, or kept them to get a penny back or something like that. But you didn't break them. So they're yesterday's disposable rubbish, which is again something we talk to the youngsters about. So there's a whole history really in this here. Okay, if you'd like to come down, we'll begin to try to detail that I think the models house nicely. Now, if we'd been walking here in 1806, remember we'd been on top of the quarry. We'd have had a lovely view of the sky, and of course we'd have had a tremendous view of the Mersey, what was then Cheshire, into Wales and beyond, depending obviously on visibility. Now the problem is, if we'd have kept walking, right, one step, and I have just disappeared, what, 40 feet, or whatever, to the bottom. You see here now, that's the edge, look, you see? That would have gone straight down. Now, if you look above my head, you'll see that this tunnel is in two sections. That's not unusual. So was the other one we were in, first of all. But is there any sort of significance that the actual break in these two arches is right at this point? To build this arch, it would have been quite reasonably straightforward off the bedrock. But to build this one to the height it is, from the bottom, is it possible they built the two arches simply to bring the land level up? Because we do know that this arch was bricked up at that end from day one. And I'll show you the evidence for that in a minute. But we don't know the answer. You have to wonder what it is. These are jellyfish. Nothing to do with jokes, but recently we had the Liverpool, the Lipper School, Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, quite often do things in here, and they leave things like that after they've done it. And this is a small sample of some of the broken. It is, because again the houses would be what you'd expect in the initial early pages. The volunteers have put this together, obviously willow pattern, which is well known, different patterns. Some of this would be probably quite valuable in one piece. There's an old wash bowl sort of from the days of where you wash that way, and then up here there's one with the overflow in it, so this was obviously a later era one where they graduated to water. So you've got soup tureen, you've got a whole history, but as you say, it's very much domestic. Now what we're going to do now is when we go down the steps and look to our left through the glass, we're looking into something we call a well tunnel. But it's not a well, there's no evidence of a well, but it is a place where water was obviously stored. Right, and I'll explain to you that when we just get down the steps. So as we come down the steps and look to our left, we'll cheat at the moment while this is open, but if you look in there, you can just see the water. You can see the coat bottle that somebody's thrown out from the door. In there. And if you come up here, you'll see this like thing going up. And if you look through the, you can see the opening in the wall. Yeah. That's the wall that would have been the end of the garden. Right. And there was a building above this. And I'll show you that in a minute. So this would have been enclosed. If you look in the distance through the greenery, you can just make out the continuation of this arch. Right. Because this was enclosed. Yes. And to the left, it branches off slightly to the left and to the right. And the evidence would suggest that there may have been, if it was dug out, some more of these chambers. But this is pretty, and if you look at this from the top, it's like a church, an ornamental, the way that they put arches together, an arch coming into an arch, into an arch, into an arch. Absolutely fantastic. Now, although this brickwork looks pretty awful, which it is, because it's withstood much over 200 years, or thereabouts, the fact is that the quality of work that Williamson's people did was excellent. And many of his workers would have gone on to work on the railway, but we know some of them did for fact, and Stevenson was impressed with the work, and no doubt they would have gone on to the docks when they developed later. I'd just like to put your helmet in there for me. And we'll just have a look at this one in particular. These are photographs of paintings of the period. Right. That actually is that bit going up that way, but this is the bit that we're really interested in, because this is where we've just been. That's the wall Smith down there. Oh, yeah. You come in up here, sort of thing.
Yes.
So we've gone in here. Notice, could they extend the properties?
Yes.
Yeah. So there were substantial properties. So certainly he did not have a purpose. He did have a purpose. That's it. We've just come out of here. That's the top one. That's just excuse me, folks. And you can see that that's bricked up. Which would indicate they had no purpose inside. Their purpose was structural, as art is art. That's the building that used to be above here. On the top. Now I described to you the triple tunnel. And I'll now give you an idea of the size of the triple tunnel, which runs from where we started off through there, underneath the car park here, to the railway, which is just beyond that sandstone wall at the top there, yeah? So what you've got is 1, 2, 3. There used to be one under there. That's the size of what is under there, albeit there may only be 2. I said it was one of the wonders of Liverpool. You might think, what are you talking about? Just like to come here and look through there. You'll quite clearly see the Tower of the Anglican Cathedral. Yeah. And if you look over there, last year they've been able to see the Catholic Cathedral. Yeah. The point being, in those two places, the guys will kindly answer all your questions about the fact that neither cathedral ever turned out to be the design that was originally. The Anglican was the nearest to it. This is obviously totally different to it. And all those things. Whereas when you leave us, we leave you wondering why, what, when, how and who. Not so much the who, but we can't answer all the questions in relation to what this was truly about. Other than, you could say, you've got land reclamation perhaps, 19th century stuff. Now the Williamson tunnels, well, thank you for coming, and if you've got any questions, we will endeavour to answer the question.
We were reading previously from the literature.